It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Geoff Mcdonald. He has spent the best part of 2 decades or over 2 decades at Unilever. He's now a global advocate, campaigner, and consultant and evangelist for all things mental health. Thank you for speaking on behalf of the Happiness Festival and Institute. Over to you, Geoff.
Thanks, LB, and thanks so much for having me today. When you talk about a happiness festival, you know, one of the things that always comes to mind is that healthy people are very, very happy in the main. If you've got your health, that's a long way to being happy. And, you know, we often talk about physical health and keeping ourselves physically healthy. But one of my most unhappy times was when I wasn't very mentally and emotionally healthy. And so I think to talk about mental and emotional health as part of our overall health and happiness is really, really important. So thank you for giving me this opportunity today. And I think it was Mark Twain who once said, the 2 most important days in your life, what are they? And you know, when I talk to audiences around the world and I ask them that question, 99% of the audiences will respond by saying the day they were born and the day they die. And I often think to myself, what is it that the human species is so pessimistic that they can't wait for the second most important day in their life, which is the day they die? But what Mark Twain said is he said the 2 most important days in your life is the day you were born and the day you find out why you were born. And the question of why, I've got really clear on that, LB, and it's all about my purpose in life is all about trying to create workplaces all over the world. And you know, a kindergarten is a workplace. A university is a workplace. The NHS is a workplace. Yes, HSBC, Unilever are workplaces. But I'm trying to create workplaces all over the world where people in those workplaces feel that they genuinely have the choice to just put their hand up and ask for some help if they are suffering from a common form of mental ill health. That could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be bipolar. You know, if you think about workplaces all over the world, there are billions and billions of people in workplaces who feel 100% comfortable about putting their hand up and asking for help if they have a common physical illness. Yet, as we sit here today in London, there are billions and billions of people around the world who are suffering in silence in workplaces. And not only in workplaces, in families, among friendship groups, where individuals don't think that they genuinely have the choice to just put their hand up and ask for some help if they're suffering from a common form of mental ill health. And you know, you can't be happy if you aren't mentally and emotionally healthy. And you might say, why are you so passionate about trying to create that sort of world? And the reason I'm so passionate about trying to create that sort of world is that I have my own story, which goes back to, I'll never forget the date. It was January the 25th, 2008. And the reason I don't forget that date is because on the 26th of Jan, 2008, my daughter was going to turn 13. So you can imagine how much excitement there was in our household on the evening of the 25th of Jan, 2008. Why? Because this young girl at midnight on the 25th was going to go through a rite of passage. She was going to become a teenager. And I don't think there's anybody listening to this today where that doesn't resonate with them. Remember how excited you were the day before you were becoming a teenager, and you wake up that next morning. It's a little bit like Christmas, and I'm now this teenager. And I remember Jen saying to me the day before, Dad, you know, tomorrow you talk to me differently. And I kind of say, what do you mean, Jennifer, I talk to you differently? And she says, yes, you do. Tomorrow you talk to me differently because I'm no longer your little girl. I am a teenager. And at midnight on the 25th, I got woken up with the most massive panic attack. Now, I had never experienced a panic attack in all my life. I don't think the word panic attack was part of my vocabulary. I don't think I'd ever had a conversation with anyone in my family, my friends, at work about a panic attack. And because my fingers are tingling, my heart is beating profusely, I'm struggling to breathe, the bed sheets are wet with sweat, I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And I say to my wife, I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And she says, why? And I explain to Debbie why. And she says, why don't you get up and walk around the room and take some deep breaths, which I do. And slowly, slowly, as I take these deep breaths, and every time I tell the story, I feel a degree of anxiety, but I take the deep breaths, and slowly, slowly, the levels of anxiety begin to subside. I get back into bed, but I can't go back to sleep. And I can't go back to sleep because I'm having catastrophizing thoughts. I'm building mountains out of molehills. I can't go back to sleep because the adrenaline is pumping through my body. I can't go back to sleep because I'm absolutely fearful that if I fall back to sleep, it'll happen again. 7 o'clock the next morning, who comes running into our bedroom? Jennifer. Why? Because she's so excited. She's 13. She wants to open the presents on the end of the bed. And all I can say to her, her younger sister, and her mum is, please, please go away. Please go away. I can't now engage in anything that is joyful, that is celebratory. And all I want to do is take the duvet, pull it over my head, and I just can't get myself out of bed. I'm paralyzed with the degree of anxiety that I feel that day. Debbie takes the kids to school. She gets back at about 10 o'clock. I'm still in bed. Cut a long story short, at midday on the 26th of Jan, 2008, I'm in a doctor's room. And the doctor begins to ask me all sorts of questions around my appetite, my levels of irritability, what I can read and can't read, my sleep patterns, my thought patterns, whether I enjoy doing the things I normally love doing, like jumping on my mountain bike or going for a swim. And I respond very negatively to a lot of those things. And he asks me a very difficult question, which was, have you had any suicidal thoughts? And I sat back and I thought, how do I answer this? If we think the stigma around mental ill health is high, the stigma around suicide is even higher. And I sit back and I think to myself, I'm going to be honest. And I say to him, yes, I have. And he said, have you planned it? And I said, no, I haven't planned it, but I know the method. And being a male, guess what? It'll work. And he turns to me and he says, Geoff, you ill? I said, what do you mean, doctor, I'm ill? You haven't listened to my chest with your stethoscope. You haven't looked into my eyes. You haven't looked into my ears. You haven't looked down my throat. You haven't taken my blood pressure. You've just asked me a bunch of irritating questions. And he says, Geoff, you're ill. I said, ill with what? He said, you're suffering from anxiety-fueled depression. Do you know what my understanding of the word depression was up until that date? I'll give you 3 metaphors or analogies. I am an ardent supporter of Arsenal Football Club. Well, guess what? You know what it's like being a supporter of Arsenal? You get 2/3 into every season. You see light at the end of the tunnel. And guess what happens? The last third, the wheels fall off. Look at our last 2 matches that we've just played. Brighton, of all people. And I would turn to my wife and say, I am so depressed about this Arsenal football team. Or I'd wake up on a Saturday morning and I want to go for my mountain bike ride. I live in the Surrey Hills and it's pouring with rain. And I turn to Debbie and say, Deb, I'm depressed. And she says, why? And I say, because it's raining outside. I remember when I first came to live in the UK, I'd been here for about 2 years, and around January time, people used to come to me and talk to me about a thing called SAD, seasonal affects disorder. And I used to say, okay, tell me more. And they'd say, no, it's the weather. It can influence your mood. And being a South African, I used to think to myself, what? The weather influence your mood? What a load of crap. What a load of crap. Why don't you just man up, you snowflake, as Piers Morgan probably would say. And here I am on the 26th of Jan, 2008, diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. As I walk out the doctor's rooms, I make a decision that saves my life. And the decision that I made as I walked out that doctor's rooms was that I refused to be burdened by the stigma that is associated with the illness. And you know, I think it was Charles Mackesy who once said, asking for help is not giving up. It's refusing to give up. And I decided that I refused to be burdened by the stigma. And in many ways, the doctor had liberated me because he had given me a diagnosis. And so what did I do? I told my family what I'd been diagnosed with. I told my close friends, and I told some of my employer, my line manager, and others at work. And you know what I got in return? I got the most wonderful outpouring of the most powerful emotion in the world, and it's called love. How many songs have been sung about the power of love? Love. And in my darkest moments, it took me 3 months to get better. I could not go to work for 3 months. And in my darkest moments, in that recovery period, the only thing that kept me going in my darkest moments was knowing how much I was loved. Nothing else. And yes, of course, the medication helped in my recovery, the cognitive behavioral therapy, slowly getting back onto my bicycle, into the swimming pool. But that sense of feeling loved, that emotion just kept me going. And that, together with a sense of hope, because I used to meet with a guy every 10 days who 2 years prior had been so ill that he'd been admitted to the Priory. And I used to meet with Martin, and I saw he was better. He just gave me hope, that little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, that this would pass. And yes, it did eventually pass. Got myself better, went back into Unilever. 2010, I had a bit of a relapse, nothing as bad as 2008. And then in 2012, October of 2012, I was walking home one evening. I was leaving Unilever House on Victoria Embankment. I was walking over Blackfriars Bridge to Waterloo Station, and my phone went, and it was my wife. And she said to me, "Geoff, where are you?" I said, "I'm on my way home." She said, "Look, you need to get home quickly. I've got terrible news." I said, "What's the news? Are the girls okay?" And she said, "Yes, the girls are fine, but one of your closest friends is dead." I said, "What do you mean he's dead?" "We saw him a couple of weeks ago." And that afternoon, he died by suicide. And here was a guy, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Think about it. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Ruby Wax, Stephen Fry, Robin Williams, Winston Churchill. And my friend, he brought so much light, energy, and love to the world, and now he was gone. And I lay in bed that night, and I came to a very, very simple conclusion. And the conclusion that I came to was that stigma had just killed my friend. He was an alpha male Afrikaner South African. Think about the South African rugby team if you can't get a sense of what that person might have looked like. And he just could not talk about his struggles emotionally and mentally. And instead, he died by suicide. And I lay there in bed and I thought that was the only difference between him and I. My ability to talk and his inability to have that one conversation that might have just saved his life. And I'm not here this afternoon saying that had he been able to talk, he would definitely be here. But what I am saying is that there's a tiny chance, a small chance that he would still be alive. That one conversation might have led him down a different direction. And that is worth fighting for every single day of my life. But I didn't know where to start. I was a South African living here. I had no idea, where am I going to start? How am I going to make a contribution? And so that night I wrote to Alistair Campbell, who back in 2012 was starting to advocate, campaign around mental ill health. And I knew that if I just could meet with him, he would open some doors for me. He would introduce me to some people. And so I went on to his website. I found his email address. I wrote to him that night, October of 2012. Within 10 minutes, I had a response from Alistair. A week later, we met up in Belsize Park. And ever since that day, he began to open some doors, introduce me to some people, which it has allowed me to take tiny footsteps on a journey filled with a deep sense of purpose. And that is to create workplaces all over the world where people feel that they genuinely have the choice to put their hand up and ask for some help if they are suffering from a common form of mental ill health. And so that's why I'm so passionate about trying to address the stigma. And you might say, well, how does that link to happiness? Well, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned as a result of my crucible moment in life, one of the biggest lessons has been that the number one priority in my life has to be my health. It has to be my health. It has to be looking after my physical health, my emotional health, my mental health, and having that sense of purpose and meaning in my life. And I'm just going to share with you a framework that I work off, which is the Warwick Edinburgh framework around well-being, their well-being index. And it talks about, in order to be healthy, in order to be happy, one needs to be able to look after one's physical health, one's emotional health, one's mental health, and having that sense of purpose and meaning in our life. Now, they don't talk about purpose and meaning. They talk about spiritual health. But I tend to, because a lot of my audience is large organizations or SMEs, I tend to use the word purpose rather than spiritual health. And so learning to look after my physical, my emotional, my mental, and having that sense of purpose and meaning has become absolutely critical to my happiness. Absolutely critical. It's become absolutely critical for me to have the energy to be able to continue this journey filled with a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning. And people often ask, what is the difference between emotional health and mental health? And our emotional health is very much our feelings, how we feel. And we've got lots of feelings. You know, we feel sad sometimes. We might feel anxious. We might feel content. We might feel happy. Those are our feelings, which is driven in many ways by our relationships with other people and our financial security. And then we get our mental health, which is our cognitive ability, our ability to remember something, our ability to look at some data and to analyze it, our ability to make a good decision, our ability to make good judgments. That's our cognitive ability, our mental health. And then right at the top is that sense of purpose, answering that question, why were you born? And I suppose, you know, probably the final message that I want to leave you with today is that if I've begun to prioritize, if I've begun to put my health at the center of everything that I do, what are some of the small little things that those of you that are part of the festival can go out and attend to so that you can maintain good physical, emotional, mental, and have that sense of purpose? And in feeling healthy, that can drive your happiness. And I think happy people can also be really, really healthy. But if you're not mentally and emotionally sound, then you can't be healthy and you can't be happy. And the little acronym that I use is an acronym called CAN-DO. And the C stands for connect. And it's something that I try and do every single day. I try and devote probably 60 minutes during the course of a day. I devote to this little acronym. So the C is about connect. It might be about connecting with a friend. It might be about just connecting with my values. It might be about connecting with nature. It might be about just reconnecting with that sense of meaning. So connection is such an important driver of our emotional health. The A stands for active. It's so important for me to build in some activity every single day so that I can maintain my good physical health. So together with some activity, my nutrition, my sleep, recovery, but the A, just that simple A of being active each day. The N stands for just try and be nice to somebody and see what that's like. See what that does to your emotional health. See what that does to your sense of purpose and giving. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, we earn a living by getting stuff. But you know what? We earn a life by giving. And just being nice to somebody is you giving of yourself. See what that does to that sense of purpose and your emotional health. The D stands for discover. Discover. Learn something new. It's so good for our mental health. And you know, in today's age, we have podcasts with various subjects and things that we're curious in that we might want to listen to and discover something new, and keeping our mind healthy and those cognitive connections healthy. And the O stands for observe. It's all about just taking time out during the course of the day to just observe. You know, look at the color of the sky, listen to the birds in the trees, notice the shapes of the leaves. When you're on the train, look outside and just take moments to just observe. And what I try and do is every 2 hours, I'll take a 10-minute or a 5-minute observation break, a recovery break. And so by applying some of the principles of CAN-DO, I think that really contributes to a more healthy Geoff Macdonald. And a more healthy Geoff Macdonald is somebody who is far more happy, far more happy. And so I leave you with just some of those thoughts and some ideas on why I think it is so, so important as well for us to be able to have this conversation around mental health. You know, I think it was Kennedy who once started a conversation, and guess what happened as a result of that conversation? They put a man on the moon and brought him back safely. And if we can just get the conversation going, anything is possible. And so I can't leave the Happiness Festival today without asking you out there to join me on my crusade in trying to address the stigma of mental ill health so that people can then employ and use some of the practices to maintain good emotional and mental health. And there are 3 things that you could think about doing. The one is you could just reflect on your own relationship to mental ill health. Is it one of curiosity? Is it one of compassion? Or is it one of intolerance? And if it's one of intolerance, go and be curious. The second thing you could do is you could start a conversation. And the last thing that you could do when you're ready, when you feel supported enough, please tell your story, because we've all got a story. And the more stories that we tell, I always say that every story that we tell is like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean. And the billions of people that are suffering in silence, they cling on to the lifeboat and they realize two things. The first thing they realize is they're not alone. And the second thing they realize is they are just normal. Thank you.
Geoff, thank you so much for that. It was incredibly heartfelt, and the power of storytelling is personified in the way that you share your story. And there were some really interesting, actionable rituals and ideas, I think, for some of our listeners, which I know they will appreciate. I'd be interested to know, of the can-do elements of your ritual, which do you think is the most important, or do you think they're all equally as important?
Look, I think they're all equally as important, because, it is about us taking a more holistic approach to our health. And it's not about just doing the stuff that enhances our physical health. We've got to do stuff to enhance our emotional health, like connecting with friends, community, with nature. We've got to do some stuff to enhance our mental health. We've got to kind of have that sense of purpose and sense of meaning, or just be nice to somebody and feel that you're giving rather than just wanting to get all the time. So I do think that all of those elements are really, really important. I mean, it's interesting that Warwick Edinburgh, they depict their well-being definition or their index through a triangle. And the triangle, the reason they use the triangle is they say that your physical health is the basis, though, for all of your health. If you're not physically healthy, that does impact how you feel, how you think, and whether you can even consider a sense of purpose if you haven't got your physical health. But LB, if you ask me the question, which of those is the most difficult to do, I will tell you that the most difficult one for me is it's around observation. Try and stand in the daylight for 10 minutes and do nothing. Just nothing. Try and go to a coffee shop and just have a cup of coffee on your own and do nothing. Oh, it is so, so difficult. And so for me, that ritual, which is really important, it's about recovery, I find that the most difficult, because I'm so easily distracted by either my phone or wanting to make a call or doing something else. And trying to really discipline myself into observation and recovery, 5 minutes every 2 hours, the most difficult.
Wow, so you do the every 2 hours for 5 minutes. And do you ask yourself any particular question to get yourself into that observation state? Do you meditate?
I do a bit of mindfulness, and I do some breathing exercises. Those are the two things that I try and do. Or sometimes I'll just stick my earphones on and listen to a bit of music. But yeah, I kind of try and keep to that rule of every 2 hours just to take 5 minutes to recover. I remember there were times when I was at Unilever, meetings back to back. And guess what I started to do was I used to put into my diary 5-10 minutes between meetings so that I could just have that moment to recover. LB, sports people do it so well. They train hard, but they are as disciplined around recovery. Yet we as non-sports people, we think we're machines. We don't need to recover. And we've got this macho image of kind of, guess what? I worked 16 hours or 18 hours a day. Eventually that machine breaks.
Yeah, busyness is a sort of proxy for success now. And it's myopic. It's arbitrary, but it's part of the world that we've created. So it's inspiring to understand in a very simple way, because I think the problem with the topic of happiness and to some degree mental health is a lot of the rituals are quite abstract, and people don't really feel like they understand or have the tools to actually go and implement it. But I think the can-do ritual is beautifully simple and profound in its simplicity. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. I'd be interested to know whether or not, having left the corporate world, albeit now trying to get these workplaces to be something different to what they are, whether you think that workplaces are getting happier or whether they are I guess, still stagnant in the way that they deal with this subject?
There's a wonderful book, LB, that's written by a professor from Stanford University, and it's called Dying for the Paycheck. Dying for the Paycheck. He has done all the longitudinal research that shows that workplaces today are negatively impacting the happiness and the health of people. You know, most of the workplaces that I go into over the last 6 years, most of them are diminishing people's lives. I think we should have workplaces where you have an employee value proposition which says, come and work for us. You know why? Because we'll enhance your life. We'll enhance your life. And you know why I think it is so possible? Because work can be very good for your health. You know, work gives you a sense of purpose, coming back to my little framework. Work gives you the opportunity to build relationships with people and a sense of community. You know, work builds a bit of a routine into your daily life. I mean, work can be so good for our health and for our happiness. Yet, for some reason, we found a way of creating workplaces that suck the most important driver of people's performance out of them. It's called energy. It's called energy, passion. You know, as you heard, I'm no Liverpool supporter. I'm no Liverpool supporter. But guess what? 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they parachuted a guy in called Klopp. And look what he brought to that club. Energy, passion. He's always got a big smile on his face, you know, and look at them. Look how they are performing. You know, their supporters, their players. And so, yeah, I think workplaces today are still very stagnant. And I would just hope, LB, that COVID-19 in many ways has got workplaces to think about how important it is to maintain the health and the happiness of their people. I think they probably realize that people can be empowered. You can relax the rules. You can allow people to get on with things without micromanaging them 24/7. And guess what they can produce? And I just hope that as we come out of this very tragic time in many ways, that there is a silver lining, and where workplaces really do begin to strategically look at how do they enhance the health and the happiness of their people. Because without that, COVID-19 has shown us, if you're not healthy and you're not happy, economies come to a standstill.
So you're actually in some ways quite sanguine and optimistic about COVID, are you? You feel like there's an inflection point that's been reached and conversations are now happening that weren't previously?
Well, absolutely. Well, that, yes. Conversations are happening that were not happening previously. You know, I've had opportunities to do my stuff all over the world over the last 9 weeks, and in countries where I've been knocking on the door for the last 2 or 3 years. And so in many ways, COVID-19 has democratized mental ill health. It's democratized it. There are very few people out there that aren't feeling anxious or feeling stressed or really concerned. And so, yes, I think it has allowed for that conversation to take place in places we would never have expected it. But then I have days where I wonder what's going to happen when we go back to a bit of normality. You know, is it going to be just business as usual? So I have my days of euphoria and I'm really energetic about this opportunity to reset. But then I also have my days of despair where I kind of think, is anything really going to change?
It feels like there is an opportunity because it is, it is a strange, uncertain time that we live in. But the experimentation that companies and governments and individuals are having to do in terms of questioning their behavior, I think is largely a very positive thing. And one of the issues with depression, anxiety, loneliness is that it's often about spending too much time in the past or too much time in the future. And what happens with COVID is it makes people realize the power of now, the importance of being in the present, and the importance of being with family and creating that community and that and cultivating that essence of society, which has been forgotten, I think.
I think you're so right. You know, if you were to say to me, is there an opportunity now? 100%. There is a huge opportunity. And I think those organizations and those workplaces that really use this opportunity to create something new will be the winners in the future.
I agree. And I'm looking forward to having another call with you where we can just share quotes with each other, because I get the feeling that you're a man who loves a good quote. But I'd be interested if you've thought about this notion of what gets measured gets managed. And at the moment, we've been measuring our success based on GDP. And if you look at Donald Trump at the moment, he's actually tweeting pictures of the market and saying, look, I've made the right decision. So in terms of achieving better mental health and creating a happier society, have you thought much about how we can measure better things? And if so, how are you measuring that?
Yeah, I mean, talk about quotes. What you measure is what you treasure, is the quote that I often use, LB. And I'm in two minds about this. I mean, I think more and more we are going to see organization, and the value of organizations is going to be based on the ESG, so environmental, social, and the governance of those organizations. And I think the social part of an organization, part of that social part has to be the health and the happiness of people. And so I would hope that in time we find ways to be able to value organizations truly on the ESG, and where the S, that social bit, is around the happiness and the health of the organization. And, there are ways in which you can measure happiness in companies, and you can look at those indices. And so I think it's an enabler to create the kind of world that we would like to see. But, at the end of the day, I think that we should just be doing this stuff because it feels like the right thing to be doing. It feels like the right thing to enhance people's lives by coming to work. It doesn't feel like the right thing to diminish people's lives. I think that organizations who create a greater sense of purpose, my last 5 years in Unilever were my best time in Unilever, because we rediscovered the purpose of that organization, which was beyond the numbers. It was beyond growth. It was beyond profitability. It was about, creating a world where we were to make sustainable living commonplace in the world, improve the health and well-being of 1 billion people, reduce our environmental footprint. And, over a 10-year period, if you just look at that organization and how it's lived that sense of purpose, I mean, the share price has gone from £10, to £50. Now, if you'd bought a share on the stock exchange over that 10-year period, you would have got 110% return on the share. If you'd got a Unilever share, you'd have a 290% return on the share, all driven by a sense of purpose, not driven by the growth and the profitability numbers. And so I would hope, there's always a business case for these things. And you wonder why we haven't seen more progress in areas like diversity, inclusion. There's a great business case for all of those things. And for me, it's about that desire and that will to just do, why can't we just start doing the right thing? And I think more and more organizations that are doing the right thing, I think longer term, they will be the winners.
There was a British politician whose father used to say, if you're not sure what to do, just do the right thing. And again, I think there's some profound simplicity to that in a world that is inherently complex. I'd be really interested to know what happiness means to you. You've shared it in your presentation, but in terms of a concise conclusion, what does happiness mean to Geoff?
I'll summarize that in one word, LB. Happiness for me is about being content. That's what happiness is for me. It's just about that feeling of contentment, of real contentment. And sometimes I can feel content when I'm feeling emotionally a bit low, but I can still be content. I can still be grateful. And yes, I can feel content in a moment of happiness, of joy. And so for me, I can't be happy all the time, but you know what I can be? I can be content with what I've got and what I can give to the world.
There's been a couple of other people that I have interviewed, and they've said similar things, which is interesting. The lack of want was one turn of phrase that somebody used. And I think a question that we've been asking ourselves at the Happiness Festival and the Happiness Institute is there such a thing as objective happiness, as an objective definition of happiness? And I think it's worth us exploring that further, because there seems to be some consistency. But going full circle, I'd love to ask, the story that you told was very moving, and I'd be interested to know whether or not you managed to figure out why. You talked about Mark Twain's question of why you actually got into the dark place that you got into. Did you establish the genesis of that?
LB, the research tells us that there are some of us out there that are more susceptible to anxiety and depression than others. And there are usually three reasons as to why one might be more susceptible. The first is, it just might be in your genes. You're just made that way. And, when I reflect and I think about my mother, she was a very, very anxious person. She's not alive anymore, but she was a very anxious person. And so maybe I've got a bit of her anxious gene in me. The second reason as to why people are more susceptible is trauma at childhood, in particular abuse. Some kind of abuse in childhood or some kind of trauma like that can make you more susceptible in your adult years. And the third is when you're an adult, the amount of crap that gets thrown at you at any one time. And when I reflect back on my crucible moment in life, there was quite a lot of, excuse my French, crap going on in my life. We as a family were localizing in this country. So I was now having to stop being an expat in Unilever. I'd saved a lot of money. I now had to take all that money, that security out of the bank, stick it into a house, buy a house. We were putting our roots into this country. There was some stuff that was going on at work that was just very, very stressful and overwhelming and having a huge impact. My kids were transitioning into different schools and all the stuff that was. So there was quite a lot of stuff that was just going on in my life. And then finally, LB, I couldn't spell the word recovery. I could not spell the word recovery. My foot was on the accelerator. It was just on the accelerator. And I just never took time out to just recover, to just observe, and to dedicate some of my time to looking after my mental and emotional health. And so I think it was a combination of, I think I've got a bit of an anxious gene. And I think the other thing is that there was just so much going on in my life then, a lot of change. And I was not stepping back and just recovering and taking my foot off that accelerator. And eventually I broke.
I wonder whether or not you think to some degree it was a blessing in disguise, because it was a catalyst for greater growth personally, and you develop this passionate purpose for life that gives you this zealousness and just real enthusiasm that is infectious. I can feel it across Zoom. So I wonder whether actually you look back on it in a way which provides contentment, because it actually led to personal growth.
Such a wonderful question. I often say that my breakdown was my breakthrough in life. My breakdown was my breakthrough. And the other day, LB, it wasn't the other day, it was probably a year or so ago, I did an interview for CNBC, and I had these two hard-ass journalists interviewing me around my experiences and the work that I was doing. And at the end of the interview, the one said to me, I'll never forget it. He said, "Geoff, you were in HR all your life, and why would you ever recruit somebody who had suffered from a mental ill health challenge like depression or anxiety, a common form, versus somebody who had never, ever suffered?" And I said, you know why I'd recruit the person who might have suffered in the past? Let me tell you why I'd recruit them. That person is probably a better listener. That person is probably more compassionate. That person is probably more in touch and in tune with his emotions, his mental state or her mental state, and therefore is in tune with other people's. So we'll be able to look out for some of the symptoms around mental and emotional ill health. Do you know that person overcame a significant challenge in their life? A significant challenge. Do you know, I think that person is probably, as a result of their breakdown, is probably a better human being as a result of what they went through. And you know, Mr. Journalist, I would prefer to have compassionate human beings leading countries, leading companies, leading public sector organizations today than some of the narcissistic bullies that I see out there. So bring it on. Give me that person who might have struggled in the past any day.
Well said, Geoff. And if you're not going into politics, then I think you maybe should do, because that's very powerful.
No, I'm not.
The other question I have, and unless I think of another question, which I'm pretty sure I will do, based on how interesting your answers have been, but this may be the last question I ask you. And it's from one of our other guests, actually. She said that happiness is a sound to her. She knows what happiness sounds like. And she gave a very interesting answer as to what happiness sounds like to her. And it was to do with her kids and nature. I wonder whether, to you, happiness sounds like anything.
Again, it comes back to that contentment point that I made. You know, for me, happiness sounds like, you know, when I'm my happiest is when I'm just feeling so content. I'm feeling so grateful for what I've got.
But is that the lack of noise? I'm actually saying, can you hear something? Is there a noise that evokes happiness? Is it when you're meditating, it's the sound of silence?
You know, it might be the sound of the leaves blowing in the trees. You know, I mean, as you heard, I love my mountain biking. And, you know, sometimes when I'm flying down that mountain and the wind is blowing and and I can just hear that wind and feel it on my body. Yeah, maybe that for me is that moment of contentment and happiness.
Thank you. I did think of another question. I'd like you to repeat, if you will, and then I'll give you between 30 seconds and a minute just to summarize or to say anything else that you'd like to put on the table. But would you mind just starting with that darkness, lightness quote? Because I think that was extraordinarily powerful and is worth, it's worth saying again.
Yeah, you know, in many ways, and this is, you know, it's linked to the whole stigma piece, and particularly amongst men who find it really difficult to talk about some of this stuff. But often the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And, you know, in many ways, that's me. I'm an energetic, fun-loving individual who brings a lot of passion to what I do. But, you know, sometimes that light that I bring is a dark, dark shadow. And I think we need to be very, very mindful of that, particularly as men are so good at masking some of this stuff. So when some people are far too energetic, maybe there's something that's going on there. And I would end, LB, just with a lovely quote that I've picked up over COVID. And it goes along the lines that, you know, love, kindness, compassion, and a positive attitude. Those things are very, very contagious. And, you know, if we can look after our health, let's not wait to catch them. Let's go and be a carrier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geoff. Really appreciate your contribution to the Happiness Festival and the Happiness Institute.
Thanks for having me, LB, and I hope the festival goes very, very well in July.
Thanks.